is a prior issue than whether or not the counterplan is a better idea than the plan. If you win that conditionality is bad, that takes place in a different realm or a different level of the debate than the substance of the debate. Does that make sense? Obviously, whenever you talk about conditionality and the counterplan being able to be kicked, in the world of magical fiat that we talk about, international actors don't know that the counterplan is being run conditionally. Conditionality bad is a theoretical reason, or a reason in the debate why the counterplan was unfair. It's a rules-based argument, and it's different from the substance, which is just taking out solvency and playing in the world of fiat and the world of the counterplan being evaluated. Does that make sense? Again, please, if any of this is going over anyone said it, feel free to raise your hand, ask a question. A lot of this is complicated stuff, so interrupt me, please. Affirmative teams must have offense against the counterplan in some capacity or another. A lot of teams think that solvency deficits are offense, and in a sense they are because it allows you to garner impacts and weigh those against the app. But there are times that you can garner offense against the counterplan. For instance, in your EU counterplan file, I think there might be answers to a spending-based disad for the EU. One thing that the affirmative could do to answer a counterplan that has the EU Act is read a disad based off of EU action. For instance, if the counterplan is to have the negative fund astronomical technology, then the app could get up and say, the EU is on the brink of a financial crisis. If they're to spend any more money unnecessarily, then that will collapse their collective economies. That's something that the counterplan links to. That's a big impact, has big impacts you can weigh against the counterplan, that the affirmative plan doesn't have to deal with because they don't have the EU spend a lot of money. Make sense? Not super complicated. Also, I'm sure you guys, if you've debated counterplans, you've probably debated hegemony terms against this counterplan. For instance, did anyone think of a reason why a consult NATO counterplan might kill U.S. hegemony? Yes, absolutely. If the U.S. is seen, if the U.S. as the world hegemon, world leader, we do whatever we want, is seen as bowing to the opinion of NATO, then other countries might not have the same opinion of the U.S. that they did before, which means that it might destroy U.S. credibility, and the app could read an impact to that to say that you kill U.S. credibility by consultation. That's bad because it leads to multiple serious nuclear war that we can't check.
Okay, this has really need to have like the same structure as it was like
generally, these kind of disads that you read against counterplans have to have the same structure as disads of the negative reads. You have to prove that your disad is relevant. You have to prove that it's unique and that there's a impact that happens as a result of the counterplan going into effect. For instance, you have to prove that the EU economy is not going to collapse in the status quo, but that the counterplan pushes it over the brink. Make sense? It's just the app form of a disad that they're reading instead of against themselves, obviously against the counterplan. We good? And obviously the example of the court's counterplan, hurting presidential powers, is bad. Permutations. Did anyone tell me what a permutation is?
It's like doing some form of doing both the counterplan and the plan.
It is in its basic form a combination of the plan and the counterplan. We talked about this a little earlier, but permutations should always be in the debate. Permutations are some of the handiest ways to answer the counterplan. I talked a little bit about this with Aaron and consult counterplans, but always have a permutation in the debate. You are against the counterplan, you are affirmative. Should always be there. I can't tell you right this enough. At least one permutation. Read 1,000 permutations if you want to. It's awesome. One of the benefits of a permutation is that it takes very little time to say the words perm, do both. And it takes a lot of time for the negative to have to answer that in the block. Because permutations are so deadly because they have to prove why the counterplan is better than the plan and the counterplan at every level. Permutations test counterplan competition. I said earlier that competition is derived from the ability of the counterplan to force a choice between the counterplan by itself versus the plan or a combination of the plan. But permutations say this counterplan is not competitive. We can do some form of these two things together feasibly, or we can even do the counterplan because we never specified what action the plan takes, and it's the same thing as the counterplan potentially. Permutations must still defend that the plan is a good idea. Permutations cannot be any random collection of ideas that you want to do to combine the counterplan with anything. A permutation must still endorse the affirmative plan. Like I said earlier, most judges will make the affirmative, will hold the affirmative to the plan text, hold them to the resolution, and the permutation must still include that you do the plan. You cannot say do part of the plan or all the counterplan because you've severed part of your plan that you initially defended. Can anyone think of a reason why it's unfair for the advocate to do that? Exactly, but I want to go a little bit further. Can anyone think of a reason why it's okay for the negative to kick a counterplan, but the app can't kick part of the app? Exactly. The affirmative plan is the basis for the debate, and the affirmative should be held to a different standard than the negative should be. Because the negative's job is to find a way to disprove the app, and so negatives are generally considered to have more options when kicking arguments, but the app cannot kick the app in permutations in most situations, but I'm not going to talk about situations where you can. Always permutations. Please, I swear if I judge any of you guys, you must have a perm text. You cannot just say, there's no reason we can't do both in the 2AC. You have to have a text like perm, do both, or perm, do the plan, and whatever part of the counterplan that you want to permute. Some common permutations. The first is to perm, do both. Obviously, it's to do the entirety of the plan and the entirety of the counterplan alongside each other. It's an entire package, two things put together. For instance, to use our earlier example, plans to go to the movies. The counterplan is just to eat popcorn. A very feasible permutation is to go to the movies and eat popcorn. The negative is not proven why the plan's a bad idea. In fact, they probably prove why a permutation solves better. So if you can prove that doing both not only is a good idea, but that it solves better than either the plan or the counterplan by itself, then the app's got a lot of leeway into beating the counterplan. A perm to do the counterplan is a little more tricky because a lot of times app teams will let the negative bully them into saying that this is what you have to defend so you can't kick out of it. For instance, a lot of teams think that the word resolved in the resolution means that the app has to unconditionally endorse their plan, and thus condition counterplans or consult counterplans are competitive because they don't guarantee that the app plan is done. Does that make sense? And so a permutation to do the counterplan is, for instance, the 1AC plan is we should fund asteroid mapping when we say the USFG, and the counterplan text is to have the Congress fund asteroid mapping. I talked earlier about Congress counterplans and agent counterplans. Can anyone think of a reason why the permutation to do the counterplan would be legitimate or would prove that the counterplan is not competitive?
Because the agents they say are in the USFG.
Yeah, it all depends on what your interpretation of the USFG is. The negative's competition for their counterplan generally is interpreting some word in the resolution and saying that this word means this means the app has to defend a specific way that the app is implemented, and so the counterplan is competitive. For instance, the way that the counterplan would gain competition by the negative is for the negative to interpret United States federal government as meaning that the app has to defend all three branches of the federal government, and thus it's okay for them to use a counterplan that just uses the Congress, because obviously the Congress is only one branch of the federal government, and thus the negative would say it competes. But the 2AC permutation would involve some form of interpreting the United States federal government to say that we don't just have to defend all three branches. The United States federal government can refer to any part of the federal government as a whole. So we can pick or choose any actor we want to use based off of a definition of the USFG that we wanted to use, and that your counterplan thus is not competitive. The app could say we didn't specify what action we took. Also, for instance, if the app plan says we should substantially fund asteroid deflection technology, and the counterplan is a pick out of a small type of technology or a little bit of funding, can anyone think of a reason why permutation due to counterplan would compete or would be good or would be theoretically legitimate? Why that counterplan would be proven to be non-competitive? Now, if the counterplan says that we exclude some minute detail, and the app, all the plan text said was that we fund substantially asteroid deflection technology, the app didn't say what kind of asteroid deflection technology that they funded, right? So the permutation to do the counterplan is theoretically legitimate in that case because the negative is not proven why the app has to defend that minute technological subset of funding for asteroid deflection. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about any of these examples? It's better to ask now than regret it later and not grass count now. Okay. At what part? Okay. A lot of counterplans are going to pick out of something small about the affirmative plan, right? Like you could say that we shouldn't fund asteroid technology. We should only fund the parts of asteroid technology that are not perceived by China as anti-satellite weapons, right? So the pick would be to pick out of that form of technology. The app could say our plan text only says that we fund asteroid mapping technology. It doesn't stipulate which technology that we fund within that. It doesn't say all asteroid deflection technology. So the firm to do the counterplan makes sense, right? Because doing the counterplan still does the affirmative plan. Does that make sense? If the counterplan still results in what the app says is their plan, then the app has made leeway in saying that the counterplan is not competitive because it didn't force a choice between an action that is the plan and an action that is not the plan. Make sense? I didn't talk about this. The firm to do the plan and then the counterplan, or the counterplan and then the plan, are things called time frame permutations. These are not generally considered to be super legitimate, and most judges, or I guess most judges who are around debate, will not allow this. But it is a way to test why the counterplan and the plan should be, or it is a way to test the net benefit. For instance, if the counterplan is an EU counterplan, we're using our asteroid mapping app, and they read the EU leadership net benefit. The app could say, perm, do the counterplan, and then do the plan. That way it could solve the net benefit of EU leadership, because in the world of permutation, the EU still took the first action. And so the counterplan or the permutation is perceived as the US following the lead of the European Union. Does that make sense? That's a way that the app can make a time frame permutation that might not test the competition, but might be a way to solve the net benefit and prove why a combination of the counterplan and the plan is still preferable to the counterplan by itself. I'm going to talk to you guys about add-ons here. I know Lee is going to talk to you guys more about add-ons in his 2AC and 2AR lecture, but add-ons are something that you should always have, or not always have in the 2AC. You should always consider for the 2AC and have add-ons ready to read. What is an add-on? Have you guys ever read add-ons in your debates over your app? What are your favorite add-ons? Hedge. Hedge is a good, usually short add-on that a lot of teams do read. Apparently Quinn doesn't read it. But especially against things like an EU counterplan, it would be really helpful. Add-ons are essentially new short advantages that you read in the 2AC. Can anyone think of a reason why you might want to read some of these in 2AC? Why might be strategic? That is certainly one of the reasons you should, because it pressures the negative. You guys are going to hear a lot from whoever's talking about the negative block about how it's the job of the negative to pressure the affirmative to have to answer a lot of arguments in a short amount of time. The app can do the same thing to the negative. If you were to read new impacts or a new impact scenario in the 2AC, that really pressures the negative, because instead of having to just go for the arguments that they introduced to the debate, they have an entirely new advantage that the app brought up that they have to answer and beat in order to prove that the counterplan is better. A lot of times these add-ons are things that the app reads that the plan solves and the counterplan doesn't. For instance, a US hedge add-on would obviously be a good add-on to read against the EU counterplan, because it's something that the counterplan doesn't solve that the plan does. And most of the time, these things can be done in 2 to 3 card modules. Does anyone know why it might be bad to read a long new advantage in the 2AC? Yeah.
It takes a lot of time to read it, and you have to pull stuff to answer.
Yes. You do not want your strategy of spreading the negative out to backfire on you, and you spread yourself out reading a long new advantage in the 2AC. You want to make it a concise add-on that doesn't take a ton of time to read, but still pressures the negative. Again.
So, what's your strategy for add-on?
Absolutely. Whenever you're negative and answering add-ons, it absolutely is a smart argument to say that our net benefit outweighs whatever it is you're add-on. There are many benefits for add-ons, but one of the primary ones is that it gives the app more impacts to weigh against the negatives impacts and to weigh against the counter plan, and thus more strategic options. I've seen teams kick all the impacts that they read in the 1AC and just go for add-ons that they read in the 2AC. This is a way that they can leverage that against counter plans and disads. Obviously, you want to know when and where to allocate 2AC time for add-ons. For instance, if you just read a random add-on on any disad or any counter plan, what is the reason why you might be selective about the type of counter plan or when or where you read these kinds of add-ons? Yeah, that's part of it. One of the primary reasons that you need to make sure that you're careful about where and when you read add-ons is obviously 2AC time allocation, but you also need to know how to leverage that against the counter plan. For instance, you don't want to read a hegemony add-on against a Congress counter plan because your Congress counter plan still has the United States federal government do a policy that solves for hegemony. You don't want to read an add-on that the counter plan solves. So before you read an add-on to leverage specifically against the counter plan, you need to make sure that the add-on cannot be solved by the counter plan. Does that make a lot of sense? And a lot of times in the 2AC people will read add-ons regardless, just to leverage against disads. The counter plan might solve, but the app still gets to leverage. We'll talk more about that in our individual labs. But make sure that you read an add-on according to the negative strategy. For instance, this past year, whenever Logan and I were debating our big economy app, we had a small, short racism critical add-on that we read. It was 2 cards. It was one that just said that we solve racism, and another one that says that we have an obligation to prevent that. Anyone think of a reason why a critical add-on would be good against even policy teams? Okay. It's good to diversify the add-ons that you can read, because if you bring another world into the debate that the negative has to answer, then that is just that much more that the negative block is pressured. For instance, our app was largely a policy app. Whenever we read a short critical add-on into 2AC, it was really hard. It was harder for the negative team to have to answer that, because they have to answer arguments at a critical level and have an ethics debate instead of just big policy impacts where they can say our impacts outweigh the bigger. Right? The worlds of the counterplan debate I've mapped out here. Again, this is just visual confirmation for
You're doing a good job, buddy.
These are the worlds that are introduced to debate in the world of counterplan debate generally. The world of the affirmative plan, that's the app's game. The permutation, also an app route that the app is in charge of, and the app decides when these permutations are kicked. Like negatives can kick counterplans, apps can kick permutations and not go for them. But you guys will get practice for that in these practice debates. And the world of the negative is the world of counterplan and the status quo. Either neither or all of the counterplan are what they have to defend. Just to give you guys more visual representation of how these things work. Are there any more questions at all about counterplans? Any questions about how to answer counterplans?